Thank you for joining this video. This is an amplified version of a shorter video on the topic of pushing ERP cost to a later date. And this commentary is designed to be salient and real, and it's based on over 1,000 ERP client projects at my company since 1996. So the topic again is the release of the buyer's cash to access ERP. ERP is intellectual property. It is low cost to no cost to release the next copy to a buyer, whether it's a single instance or whether it's just opening capacity on a multi-tenant server. It's very low cost at the point of releasing another copy. Obviously, there's lots of cost over time to keep an ERP company going, but the key point is at the point that a buyer says, I'll take your ERP, Mr. ERP seller, there is no further incremental cost to speak of. And you compare that to a big, beautiful excavator where someone wants to buy one, there's a lot of cost. Those variable costs that go into each excavator as it's sold. So there needs to be cash put down. So a question could be asked, why do the sellers want cash upfront for intellectual property that has this attribute of no incremental cost to release the next copy? Well, there's two major reasons. One is all businesses, of course, like cash flow, obviously. And once a business gets used to the way cash is released for their product, they start to evolve, or they move in that direction. Whereas if they were forced to wait to a go live event through whatever means, they would arrange things differently. They'd make it work, but it would take some real effort. Right now, it'd be a shock to the ERP company's system to even contemplate waiting to an ERP go live before they are paid. You know, the time that the buyer has the first moment of actual value for that ERP. The second major reason is that the ERP projects, no one on the planet remembers their last ERP project as a lot of fun, low risk, smooth sailing, on schedule. It's always some version of difficulty and delay and cost overruns. And in that light, the sellers reasonably want the buyer to be invested. They want hooks in the buyer, and that means a lot of cash already expended to get to the point of the day that they might be weak and want to quit, and they can't because they just have too much invested in the ERP and the implementation to date. It's real. But those two reasons, the cash flow and the wanting the buyer to be invested, ultimately are not good reasons for the buyer to spend a lot of money up front for intellectual property that has no incremental cost. If we were sitting in a business school class and designing the proper way to release this, it wouldn't be, and focusing on buyer's best interests, it wouldn't be what it is today. There's a longer story as to how it evolved, but it is what it is. Now, there are techniques for getting, pushing off the cost to a future date, and they revolve around three basic areas. One is simply negotiating for paying in the future. Now, if you ask any ERP seller, can I do that? They'll have some version of no. But ultimately, if the ERP seller believes they are otherwise not going to win the deal, or that the buyer is talking to two or three candidate ERP, and maybe one of the others are entertaining some way to push the cost into the future, more at a time where there's actual value, then ultimately, if the right buttons are pushed, that seller will say to themselves, I'd rather have this cash flow in the future and be paid for services up to that point than nothing. They would definitely take that as a general statement. The only reason they wouldn't is because of the culture is so strong. It's just such an anathema to them, they just can't do it. or they reasonably say, I can't even let this be a precedent. I don't want anybody else to know about it. So it has to be done in a way that's kind of quiet or in a way that doesn't look like what it is. The second way of three that I'll mention today is basically a hybrid of the first. It's to buy a few licenses to the ERP at the start. And it could be, let's just say the buyer ultimately needs 100 full licenses and 25 shop floor. Well, buy 20. And it could be a rational story that this may be all I need. I'm just putting in one of my business units, but may put in more, don't know. But the key is for there to be this premise of buying more at the time of knowing when they're needed, or at least when the system is up and running, if that day ever occurs, that the price then has to be prearranged. Can't be, buy them then and hope for whatever they'll offer. You'll get hosed if you don't have that pinned down tight for future amounts and terms, including terms for how the cost escalates over time. That's a massive topic that we have other videos and white papers on. And then the third method, which is innovative, disruptive, and again an anathema to the industry, is don't buy the ERP, just start implementing. You may say, well, how would you do that? Most of an implementation is preparing the business and really getting ready to migrate processes to a new structure. In this case, the ERP with proper scope understood. Now, most of that can be done without the ERP. I'm not going to explain it all here, but it doesn't take long to figure out, that would work. As long as there's an understanding of the ERP, its capabilities, its limitations, experts involved, they don't need to be from the ERP company, then the implementation can 80%, practically 90% proceed with final configuration and testing and whatnot at the end. And there are other ways to have access to some instance of it to conduct that testing and vetting even before the application is purchased. Finally, there'd be a big question of, how do you arrange for the pricing to be not just an absolute hose job at the point of execution? Well, that is a critical piece of the puzzle. So there needs to be some approach, prearranged pricing, or some approach where the preparation for putting in the ERP is in the context of two ERP, which can be done. They get two that are similar for the right, that are right for a size and type of company. You can take the implementation and go to either one rather far. Now, what I just described there with item number 3 is, it's not risky in the classic sense. It's very different, and it's just something that should be understood, not for everybody to pursue unless they have real strict guidance and understand what they're doing. But the presence of such options is useful to know about as one is negotiating and deciding what to do with these ERP sellers who are all designed to squeeze as much money out of buyers as they can initially, and even more so by having few to no obstacles to raising prices over time. So in wrapping this up, the benefits to the buyers are the obvious: cash preservation, but there's more than that. The ability to be agile, to be able to actually cancel the project or change the time frame is valuable. We had many clients in the last 10 years that ended up, I'd venture to say a third, that from when the ERP selection started or implementation, they became involved in some buyout scenario to where it became uncertain. Well, do we want to use this ERP, or maybe some potential acquirer may point us in another direction, and the ERP project got delayed. Meanwhile, they had to keep paying for access to an ERP they were not using. And the other and last benefit I'll bring forward today is when the seller is got a big day of production, meaning the day the buyer goes live is the day they have their big payoff and they're being significantly paid. They just simply stay more interested as compared to a regular deal where they've been paid, and if the project goes south or is canceled, they've been paid. And truth be known, most failures are the cause of the buyer. So the sellers have a legitimate point of view that if this fails, they don't feel too bad about it. It's subjective, and every case is different, but it's how that whole thing evolved. And one of the key reasons they're so keen to get their hooks in folks, because they're so used to failure or various forms of failure. And if the buyer wasn't invested, as mentioned earlier, there'd be less obstacles for the buyer saying, I quit. And frankly, that's another discussion as to whether that is a good thing for the buyer to be invested. But that's a side notion, not to be the basis for putting a bunch of cash in a project that's a big what if that we'll be producing maybe in a year. The last thing I'd like to mention is what I've just described on how cash ultimately would best be released in an ERP project. It is inarguably a better commercial arrangement for the buyers. And ultimately, there will be some ERP sellers go ahead and just do it that way, material sellers that have momentum. And that will be a big attraction to the buyers. And it'll pretty much drag the others to come along in some version, and ultimately completely, to where there's no longer companies spending hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars on this big, useless thing called ERP that's sitting on a shelf doing absolutely nothing for the company until someday that it hopefully goes live. That was never a good idea. It isn't today, and someday that will be replaced. Not now. What I've just described, again, is an anathema to the industry, but it's a good thing to know about. Thank you for your time to hear the details on this topic. And as always, Engleman Associates, my company, all these years, we do support these projects, and we're not just walking around alleging ourselves as smart consultants, but have extensive capabilities, methodologies that have been, let me show you here, this is our client-facing documentation. And not that we expect clients to just read this, but it makes the point that we've been formalizing and tuning and improving these procedures over the literally decades now to fit the times, to fit best practices, what we've learned. And we represent that no one out there has this sort of institutional knowledge that allows teams, our team, and the client's team to really move together smartly and just keep ahead of the little details on every step of the way that make a difference for those steps, and in the aggregate make a big difference. Thank you for your time. Take care.